SpaceXplr episode, guys. Today we have a very special guest, so you have to make sure that you're going to watch this episode. I mean, we're going to go into every direction today, but we're going to talk about astrophotography a lot. And today's guest is Mack Murdoc. So, Mack is the world known award winning long exposure photographer that specializes in astrophotography and light painting. So, with his latest book out, Secrets from the Stars, Mac's goal is to teach and inspire the hearts of many to have fun, be creative, and not forget to once in a while to look up. And again, for more information, there will be this great Instagram page included. So we have to make sure that you get in contact with this man. Again, ask the questions because I'm allowed to say that because he works in an OPT. So when it comes to asking those questions about getting started in astrophotography and equipment, this is your man to talk with. So again, Mack, as once again, I want to tell you big thank you again for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, thank you. It's good times, good times. So look, like I came across this man on social media, so I always say to you exactly the same, guys. Go in contact with these people now. It's a great time. Make relationships. Build that community. These are people are great. They can provide you quality time, give you all the answers. I'm super grateful to have you on today on the podcast as well, and spending this quality time. So look, Mac, can you take us back to the Big Bang, to the beginnings of your personal journey? I mean, can you give us a little bit of background and story? How did you start it personally yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. So my life has taken so many different turns along the way. It Originally, when I was in school, I wanted to be a rock musician, a rock star. So I studied music, and then I went to college and got a degree in classical composition for film scoring. And then literally the day after I graduated, I realized I didn't really want to do this anymore. So wasted all that time, but it was fun. And then I got into stunts and parkour, and did that for about 6 years and joined the stunt industry and did that for a little while. And then I realized I don't really like feeling broken all the time. So I went to a concert one day, and I just went by myself. I was enjoying myself. And in the very front row, when I was standing there, I met up with some guy. I had never met him before. I never talked to him. He was just standing there, and we were just waiting for the band to show. And his name was Chris Bauer, and he introduces himself. He tells me that he's a light painter, and I'm like, what the hell is light painting? And because I've only known light painting as being like you grab like a little light and you draw a little heart over a long exposure or write your name. But so we start talking, and I'm thinking this guy's kind of crazy because he's saying that he does light painting as a profession. I was like, okay. Anyways, later on that night, he adds me on Facebook, and I look at his page, and I am so far blown away. It was like, that was the moment I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I need to learn how to do this. And it was like 2 weeks later, I bought my very first camera. This is late 2016. So about 4 years ago. And I bought my very first camera. I started learning, what exposure is, long exposure, and, ISO and aperture. And I just started light painting, and that was super fun, and start getting creative with different like moods and textures. And it's so much more than just writing your name with an LED. And then about 3 or 4 months later, we're now in January or so, I discover an astrophotographer by the name of Mark G. He has a very famous photo called Full Moon Silhouettes. It's basically a moon, and it's moving in front of a bunch of people hiking on a mountain. It's super beautiful. It's super easy and basic, but it's like beautiful at the same time. And anyways, he did Milky Way photography, and I had always been into space ever since I was a little kid. I used to go camping with my kind of he's like a second dad to me. He lived away across the way. His name was Jack, and we just used to go camping, staring at the stars. But as a kid, it's like you look at the stars, but you don't really know anything. You don't know what the Lagoon Nebula is. In fact, most of the time when you're a kid, you don't even know it's the Milky Way you're looking at. It's just like, what is that really cool thing? And so when I found out that you can take a picture of the Milky Way, that changed my life. And I went out that night that I saw his work, and I drove 2 hours out to Joshua Tree and uh, realized that, and I took a picture of the sky, and I was so excited to see it, and then I realized that nothing showed up, and I was like, why is nothing showing up? Went back home, and you find out that the Milky Way isn't up at, during the winter. It's kind of like a late spring, summer, early fall target. So it was back to the drawing board, do a bunch of research. How do I do this? And start learning as much as I could so that when summer and spring came around, I was ready. And I remember I went out to Joshua Tree in like April the next, and took my very first Milky Way image, and I was hooked. It was almost every weekend after that I went out to Joshua Tree and just kept shooting, and then it was a bunch of different locations and kept shooting the Milky Way, and it was just trying to get as good as you can, as fast as you can, and enjoy yourself with your friends in the process. And that eventually led to doing deep space astrophotography, and then I start fusing the two, which is I wish I could say it was easy, but it's actually incredibly difficult to do light painting and astrophotography at the same time, just because they both deal with different kinds of exposures. And there are times where I'm literally changing the lenses or aperture mid-exposure, and it became the love of the challenge. The challenge was the best part. It was, how do I, here's the image I have in my head, this is what I want, how do I get that to happen? And it's thinking outside the box. When you normally take a picture or a long exposure, you normally don't think, all right, let's change the aperture halfway through the exposure so that I can paint with this light and not overexpose it. How do I get this galaxy mixed in with a foreground image? It's like, okay, let's take off the lens and put on another lens halfway into the exposure. It's all about getting creative, thinking outside the box. And I'm definitely not the first one to do it, but like, I do enjoy the idea that not enough people know about it, and I can teach people about it, and it's not something that's oversaturated, that I can have some voice to let everyone know how to do it and be creative on their own. So it's kind of where I'm at.
And that is awesome. I mean, that's a journey just that it continues always, and I'm sure that you're evolving all the time. Also, every single day, because again, there's so much more that, like, after having all these kind of conversations with astrophotographers, like, you do find out, like, the learning curve is infinite, and there's always something new. And especially now where we live in this kind of technology age, you can apply so many different softwares and tools to make your work even different right now. So the journey is continues from there. But again, I'm looking at the line painting. So it's been discovered by Stephen Knapp. So introduced in 2002. So actually not that long ago, as we think about. But again, so for the people coming back to that point of line painting, so again, if you're gonna go to the Instagram, and people are gonna find that, because I'm pretty sure they're just saying, it's not about painting just hearts and doing that type
Yeah.
of work. Like, what does it take for someone like to get started in this? Like what would be kind of the beginning stages for?
Well, for photography in general, it's learn the basics of a camera. And I feel like that's important before you get into light painting or before you get into astrophotography. And I mean, even light painting is relatively new. It is. I think it's a little older than 2002. I do know that Pablo Picasso did light paintings. If you type up Pablo Picasso and light paintings, you'll see some of his. I would definitely say the most important thing is learning the basics of a camera, especially what we call the exposure triangle. There's exposure, aperture, and ISO, and figure out which one does what, the pros and cons of both, and that will just help you so much with any kind of photography that you do. For example, with astrophotography, you know that the things that you are shooting are so dim and you're shooting at nighttime, so you're gonna need to have a really high ISO, which for those that don't know is the sensitivity of the camera. It's basically amplifying the light that is that is coming in, and you're going to need to do that in order to see the really faint things out in space. So that I'd say is probably the most important. And then after that, I would definitely go with be creative. Don't ever be afraid to take a bad photo. I mean, especially with the digital age of being able to just delete something. Like if you don't like it, just delete it. And even that I don't think you should do anyways, because you might take an image and you might not be happy with it, but that's also like that's a mark of progression. It's the fact that before that image, you probably took a worse image. And then, but that one's a little bit better. And in 2 years from now, you can go back to all your old photos and be like, wow, I thought that was awesome at one point, and that's awesome in itself. But now the stuff that I'm taking is so much better. I think for everybody that is starting photography, no matter what kind of photography you're doing, especially astrophotography or light painting for that matter, is mark progression. It is such a rewarding thing to see the accomplishments that you've done. For me personally, this is what I do. I actually recommend it for everybody. But it's take let's say for instance you're starting astrophotography. For me, it was Orion. Um, I shot the Orion Nebula, and it was terrible. Absolutely terrible. There was lines going through it. It was all blurry, whatever, but it was terrible. But every single year since I started deep space, I've taken a picture of the Orion Nebula to the best of my abilities. And every single year you see a big gap in progression where it's like, where I thought this was awesome, it's not awesome anymore because this is awesome. And while that's not awesome anymore, this is awesome. So it helps you feel good about yourself that, like, man, I got better over time. So definitely the three things I would mention is learn your camera, uh, mark progression, and don't be afraid to take a bad picture. Just go out and shoot. Like the more that you shoot, the better you'll be, the faster. And it's practice makes perfect, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. You cannot be great without being good first, you know? You just have to
Yeah.
go and do it. You just have to go and do it. And a lot of that is kind of, so sometimes, like I have these conversations, on like this, on the podcast or after we done. And I have sometimes having these conversations with people who are involved into like space projects. Some of those people I've never had on the podcast, but I would love to. But I'm talking about, and these people are talking about space, and about the vast of it, and again about billions of light years away, and like it's mind-boggling when you think about that. But when I'm having started to have these conversations as a business person, is like, I feel like those people are froze up sometimes, which is very interesting for me because I'm thinking like, how can you think about space and at the same time be, let's say, shy, so it's very like interesting. But I would say for the people, yeah, exactly, just go on and do it. Like, don't be shy. Don't be shy of putting your efforts, because I know, like, I got some people telling, if you're gonna start posting something, you get some negative reviews, which for me it's crazy. Like, why somebody
Yeah.
would not support somebody else's journey, especially if it's all about space? Because I mean, space is quite important. Like, we
Yeah.
are surrounded by it. I mean,
People being negative to positivity. I never understood it.
yeah. Well, that's the life is, that's the life is. It's like for us, maybe for us, it's hard to, okay, let's go on the same page, boom, done. That's it. Because we all
Yeah.
kind of we can align a little bit easier. But if other people will kind of understand maybe the same principles, and that's what the show is all about, kind of helping people to understand where we go and what's happening. Yeah. So about that, about light photography. So what light painting. So what would you say for the people again when it comes to the camera? Is there a specific camera that people should use? And on that note, maybe we can talk about some resources when it comes to education, because most of the time people when they talk about astrophotography they mention like Trevor Jones and Astro Backyard, those kind of resources. So maybe do you have a course and you can help teach people like how people should go about with that?
Yeah. As far as the camera goes, anything that can do a long exposure is what you need. You don't need very much as far as like the tech of it. I mean, obviously, like there are cameras that are better for low light and whatnot, but as far as just light painting goes, use what you got. If you have a budget, just get whatever's in your budget that can do a long exposure. Any sort of DSLR or mirrorless camera will work and work well. So I'm very much a supporter that you are 90% of the image. You and your creativity is 90% of the image. Gear is 5%, and the location and is everything else. And when I say 90% is you, composition. It's where is the background, where's the foreground, where's the subject, what is it that you want to highlight, where's the emotion. It's everything that comes from your creativity. All that stuff that's what makes a picture. um, i I
So
think.
can I ask you a question? Sorry for interrupting. So
No, of course.
is for you personally, do you have like a creative process of getting in a zone, and maybe you can recommend somebody, how to get in that kind of creative mode?
It's a little bit of both. A lot of sometimes it's just on the fly. I'll just be out and I'll be walking or hiking, and whatever I see a cool looking rock, I'm like, oh, that would be cool to like paint this rock with some red eyes and give it some horns and put some smoke around it or whatever, and just paint it that way. And when I mean smoke, I don't actually mean like smoke. I mean light painted smoke and everything. um, the cool thing about here's something to think about when it comes to the creativity of light painting is anything you can think about, you can paint. It's the same thing with like with art and normal drawing. It's if you wanted to think something so outrageous and not real, like a dragon wearing boots with Rastafarian hair and whatever, it's like you just think you can paint it like on a piece of paper or draw it or whatever. It's the same thing with light painting. So, but you're just fusing that in with whatever your background is. And I think that's the coolest part. So your creativity is where your limit is on what you can create. If you can open up your mind and just think, okay, this is the crazy thing that I really see in my head, just find a way to make that happen. And you can make that happen. But to answer the second half of your question is, well, it's some of it's on the fly. Some of it is you have an idea in your head. You're like, okay, I would like to paint a human person with the Milky Way in back, smoke around me, and some like a cool looking orb thing. Now, when you have an idea like that you want to execute, you have to figure out how do I execute it. So the Milky Way, you know how to do a Milky Way. It's a 30-second exposure with a high wide open aperture, but then you think of everything else that has to go into it. So like the person that you're going to draw. Normally when I draw a person, I have a small little LED and I literally just trace myself. And so when the light painting comes out, you don't see me at all. You see whatever's behind me because of that's what's been exposing, but you also see the lines that I've been drawing. So it's just a light person. And but you have to figure out, okay, if this light works with a lower ISO and a more stop down um, aperture, then you have to be able to change that in the camera as the exposure is going. So it's basically, in short, in one sentence, or I guess two, three sentences, but have your idea, figure out exactly what you need for the idea, and then figure out the order in which you have to execute that idea. And you know what? Most of the time, it's going to fail. I promise whoever's out there, you're going to try like 5, 6 times and it's going to fail. But you know what? The 7th or 8th time, you'll get it, you'll nail it. And you're like, it feels great. And it's so worth it to get an image that you're like, man, I just did that.
And that is awesome. I love one photo that I'm currently looking at, guys. If you just go to Mack's Instagram and look for Unreality, if you look for that work, because I love that photo for again for just the way it looks. I mean, it's like it's super cool for me. So again, go and find that and comment underneath that photo. Comment, found it or something like that, and let him know that it's an awesome photo. I mean, all of these photographs are awesome for sure. So what about again, because you're an artist at the same time, because you're a musician, you're coming from kind of that creative background also. Maybe that's kind of in your DNA, in the I don't know, but that's another discussion. But do you think maybe you still go personally, or maybe you would recommend people again if it's not getting in that creative zone, and maybe part of that is getting some inspiration when it comes to like just being inspired and because you have to look from different lenses just in here personally and think about, okay, so I think about I can do something with this, and again what's happening right here, and then you kind of have to be like a creator, like a producer a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
what would you recommend to the people? I mean, do you follow any people yourself personally, books, like any content, and maybe somebody that you can guide and recommend people to go to kind
Oh,
of look
yeah.
after as well?
I have, I've got this one right here. I highly recommend. There we go. It's called Secrets from the Stars. I'm actually one of the authors in it too. And basically, it teaches my light paintings and how to do it, and all the steps that I go to creating an orb, or or I'll bring up a picture or two, but something like that,
Wow.
where it's just star trails and a person in the back with some light, and so it just, I think, and a lot of that comes from just going out there and trying things. It comes from figuring it out, but there's also people that I'm a big fan of finding inspiration. So people like uh, Chris Bauer is one of my favorites. Eric Pere is another one of my favorites. Dan Chick is great when it comes to the more technical, crazy side of light painting. He likes to use like stencils and flips images, and sometimes takes an image that has no lens on it. Like he's brilliant. But I think I think what's great about light painting, or just photography in general, is I'm a big fan of looking at someone's piece of art. Like if you come across a light painting or astrophoto that you really like, replicate it. Like try as hard as you can to replicate it. And then like obviously don't post it up and say like it's your own whatever, like you invented this. Like don't do that. But replicate it so that you learn how to do it, and you can figure out like the kind of techniques. Also, like a lot of us, we're super cool. We like, if you just reach out to us, especially like I would be glad for anybody that's listening, just reach out to me and with like, hey, how did you do this? Like this is a cool picture, and I'd be glad to let you know. Most of us are that cool as well. But a lot of it is just you figure it out. It's a lot of trial and error. It's you see an image, you replicate it, and then what you do is you turn it into your own. You put your own spin on it. You put your own emotion on it. It's not replicate anymore. It's evolved to you, and I think that is important. It's learning from the best, and that's life in general. Like
Mhm.
the person that created the computer is not the same person that's created every other computer. It's someone else that took the computer and was like,
Yep.
how do I evolve this? How do I make this into something new? And then they make it into something new, and it's still a computer, but it's a totally different idea.
Exactly.
So
because everything is kind of stolen, if we can call it that way. Because if we look for any perspective, again, from business, and kind of, unless you're one in a billion, and you're kind of, I don't know, genius type of person, and you're making like 1,000+ inventions like Thomas Edison or something like that, maybe you
Yeah.
can brag about that I created that. But most of the
Mhm.
time, everything is kind of, what you're saying, is duplicated or tried to make better. And we sometimes think that we came coming from like very creative ideas and stuff like that. But if we think about that, we probably seen it somewhere and it's been duplicated, multiple times before that. Yeah, but
Yeah.
improving something, that's the probably the best thing that we can do, is just pick up. Because again, when I have these conversations with PhDs who are doing some, let's say, important work and kind of research when it comes to space exploration, and that's exactly what they say. Look, I'm not going to be able to find all the answers, but I'm just going to drop it there. Somebody will pick it up and start, improving and finding different answers and different takes and looking from different, angles. And that's the life
Right.
works. So what about, again, because you're working with OPT, as I mentioned off camera, it would be a shame not to ask you about the equipment. So can you give us a little bit of a kind of story? How did you started to work with them, and what do you currently have? And I mean, you mentioned that you can share some of that equipment that you have in the background, and some of the bed as well. And
Yeah,
again,
sure.
take us through the journey again, for the people who are first time coming to this type of podcast. They never came across, and they probably don't know what does it take to get involved with astrophotography. Any tips on like getting started in this field?
I'll kind of start with the basics. So and this is, let me start off by saying this is just my opinion, and that there are so many different ways to do astrophotography or get into the hobby or any of, like, it's there's no right way. And I know a lot of astrophotographers and a lot of photographers will tell you like this is the right way, but there are so many different ways to take a great picture. So I can kind of just only tell you what I do. I'd like to think that it's a somewhat popular idea, but or popular method is, first, just go out with a camera and a tripod and a lens, preferably like a wider angle lens, and you shoot upwards. It's Milky Way photography is a place where most people start, and then after that you get into what's called a star tracker, where it's a small, I don't have one right here, it's in the other room, but it's basically it's a small little mount, and you put your camera on it, and what the whole object of it is to follow the night sky as the night sky moves, allowing you to take longer exposures of the sky, which longer exposures equal being able to capture more details. It also allows you to lower your ISO and get less noise in your image. It is the perfect gateway to deep space astrophotography, and you can actually do deep space astrophotography on it too. There is some limitations, like the weight. You can't put like a nice heavy telescope on it, or even like a really heavy lens. But you can definitely shoot further. Um, and so after that, when you feel like it's time, unfortunately, there's not something between the $300 star tracker and something a lot more expensive, like what I'll show you in a second. Is it, After that, it's time to upgrade to a bigger mount, and then you can just put your camera and a nicer lens on it, or upgrade to a telescope, which was what I did. And so I'll leave this here for a second. And so what I did was, as soon as I wanted to make the jump into deep space astrophotography, I bought this telescope right here, which is an Explore Scientific ED80. Um, it is the perfect kind of beginner / advanced telescope, that I highly recommend. And the reason why, it's a lower focal length. So think about it like this: if you're trying to look um, at something in space? Is it easier to find something in space when you're trying to look through something super small, like the little hole that's right there? Or is it easier to find it if it's a nice big wide field of it and you just kind of have to? So that's a nice big wide field. So the smaller the focal length, the easier it is to start. When if you start off with like a 2000 millimeter telescope, it's almost like finding a needle in a haystack, and it's tough to do. It's not impossible. Some people do it. I don't recommend it. So start off with a nice, easy telescope. That I think was absolutely the perfect telescope that I recommend. And after that, I upgraded to this guy over here, which it's exactly the same telescope, but a lot bigger. So that one was an 80 millimeter telescope, which has a 420 millimeter or 480 millimeter focal length. And then this right here is the same thing, but it's 127 millimeters, which is, I believe, a 958 millimeter focal length. And yeah, this is the mount. So this is what helps it guide along the stars. In fact, I can do this and show you. So it moves as the sky moves in the night sky and follows your target, allowing you to take really long exposures. And a lot of the time I'm taking like a 10-minute exposure of a certain object, and I'm taking multiple of those and then over many nights. And so having a nice mount is so important. In fact, I'd say the mount is way more important than the camera or the telescope. It's because if you have a bad mount, you probably have a bad image. And but you can make a good image from a bad camera. You can make a good image from a bad telescope. And then I'll show you a cool one. Oh, this thing weighs a ton. And then eventually, if you want to do other kinds of cool kinds of astrophotography, like daytime astrophotography, I know what you're thinking. Daytime astrophotography? What? But we all forget we've got one big star in the daytime. It's the sun. So this is the Coronado Solar Max 2. This is what I use to do all my solar stuff with, capture solar flares and solar prominences. And something like this, they're expensive. I don't recommend immediately with one of these things. There are other kinds of ways to do solar, like having a solar filter, but I would say that having a solar telescope is probably the best ways. And then basically the whole idea is you just build up bigger telescopes, get into things. There are three kinds of telescopes. There is a refractor, which is like this one, which basically lenses in it. There's reflectors, which are like what we would call Newtonians, or Dobsonians, or mirrors. So this is your telescope. The light comes in through this way, bounces off this mirror, comes over here to another little mini mirror, and then shoots up into an eyepiece, and that's how you see it, and that's how the magnification is. Those are great too. I think they take a lot more maintenance. You have to adjust the mirrors every single time. You have to wait for your telescope to settle down in its weather, because the focus will shift, the mirrors will shift as it gets cooler in the night or warmer. So refractors are very much plug and play. And then there's catadioptric, but that's basically super. I'm not going to get into it, but they're basically like Schmidt-Cassegrains almost, where it's a lens and a mirror in the same telescope. Those are amazing telescopes, but I don't recommend them for beginners.
So again, so what would you recommend, for the beginners, and when we're talking about the price budget? So, and what will be your take of buying? Should you recommend like buying a brand new equipment, used one, and again, can we go through the equipment you mentioned? Like there's a camera, star tracker, let's say mount, scope, and like what
Yeah.
other you mentioned, before kind of off camera talking about filters. And again, because most of us live in this kind of Bortle 8, 9, scale because we're stuck in the cities. Can you talk about, those filters and how we can tackle those light pollution, problems, and what other type of filters we can use for astrophotography as well?
Yeah, of course. Do I actually have one over here? Oh, it's in the other room. Okay. So, yeah, in short, start off with a camera, a good old camera and the night sky. Second, get yourself a star tracker. It's $300. It will let you take some of the most epic pictures of the Milky Way. I might be able to show you guys later a few of them. If you go to my page, you'll definitely see a bunch of them. Um, and then you can do filters. There are a bunch of different kinds of filters. There's specific light pollution filters. There's narrow band filters, and basically what it does is, so you have your full spectrum of light. This is everything that we see, that our eyes can see. You've got your reds, your blues, your greens, your blue, and then you've got the other section, which is like ultraviolets and X-rays and gamma rays and all that stuff that in infrared that you can't see. So there are specific parts of the spectrum that we can see. That is a lot of what light pollution is. And there are filters that basically will cut out that section. It's not 100% foolproof, but I mean, anything sometimes is better than nothing. There is a filter by Radian called the Triad Ultra filter, which is hands down, not even joking. This is the best filter that you could use for any sort of light pollution. I live in Los Angeles, California, specifically in Hollywood, which is probably one of the top 10 most light polluted cities in the world. And I live right in the heart of Hollywood too. So if I'm lucky, I can see maybe 3 stars in the sky. And um, that I have taken some of my favorite deep space astrophotography with, and it's just with the help of good filters. The Triad Ultra filter is one of them. And the reason why that works, so the Triad Ultra filter is a little bit different than just a regular light pollution filter. And it works a lot better than a regular light pollution filter because, okay, so here's your spectrum again. What it does is, instead of just eliminating this little section over here, that's your light pollution, which light pollution is a little bit of everywhere, but it's mostly kind of in the yellows area. What the Triad Ultra filter does is you have basically small little slivers of light in very specific wavelengths, and those very specific wavelengths are hydrogen, what's called hydrogen alpha. We got hydrogen beta. We've got what we call sulfur 2, and oxygen and O3, which is oxygen. So basically hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen, and it just takes that one little sliver of sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, and eliminates everything else. And so that cuts out a huge amount, and so it allows people like me to shoot in light polluted skies. You can also buy separate filters, like Chroma makes some really good ones. Optilong makes a bunch of really good ones that are a lot less expensive. I know that Chroma just raised their prices to something absolutely outrageous, and so I think at this point, before a few weeks ago, I would say Chroma hands down. At this point, I'll probably say Optilong. But
Got it, got it. And for all of that and more, if you go to optcorp.com, you're gonna find a lot of great, again, pieces when it comes to that equipment. And again, Mac is available again on Instagram. He said again, because I'm sure you get a ton of people asking you questions, and I'm sure you're a busy man, but I think you would find a little bit of time to answer that question if
oh
you're
yeah,
looking to get started in astrophotography. Here you go. So he will make a time for you. So
oh yeah,
so
I love
again,
helping.
Awesome, awesome, love it. So, what about this kind of post processing? Because most of the time people, especially the beginners, because I got a few kind of, let's say, people who are NASA, solar ambassadors, and they have all these people talking with people, showing like planets through telescope, and when they kind of get this first glance, so a lot of people kind of the first entry point you mentioned, like Orion Nebula or was it Saturn, something like that that people see, before, and it was kind of entry point. But when they see it, they were like, "Man, I didn't expect that." Because when they're gonna go to your Instagram account, they will be like, "I want to see this." And again, this is this kind of post editing, like stacking process. So can you talk about that? What you personally are using, and is there any difference when you work with that in, let's say, you mentioned this kind of light artistic way as well? Are you use the same softwares or anything completely different that's made up just for this exact work? And can you take us through
Yeah.
the steps and process?
Yeah. So up until maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I was strictly in Photoshop. Also, I have a very strict belief for just my own personal artwork. It's not, I agree with it if other people want to use it. I think art in general is very subjective. So whatever you like in your image, do this. So don't, what I'm about to say, like, don't feel like this is the way. I don't like adding anything into my photo that wasn't there before. I don't like taking anything out that was there before, unless it's something like a plane that flies through, or these days we have a lot of Starlink issues. But besides that, as far as the actual object that I'm shooting or the landscape that I'm shooting, I keep it very raw. I touch it up. I play with the levels and the colors and this kind of stuff. But as far as adding anything in or taking anything out, I don't do any that kind of manipulation. Um, I I was in Photoshop the whole time. Now, I now work in PixInsight, which is specifically for deep space astrophotography, and it's I don't feel like it can do anything that Photoshop can't do. They can both do the same amount, but I feel like PixInsight definitely does help me save some time on things. I'll kind of give you an example, which will kind of give it a little insight of how I take the images that I do. Um, if I'm shooting something, let's like, especially in nebula, let's say the Cygnus Wall, which is in the Cygnus region. In the North American Nebula, for those that know the bigger thing, it's a little section of it. I have an image on my Instagram where I image that, and what it is in order to get that image, you have to take a lot of hydrogen images. So you just have a little hydrogen filter in there that, like I said, the spectrum that I talked about, it's one little sliver and it eliminates everything else, which is what's called a narrowband filter. So I take a bunch of images of just hydrogen, and then I swap that filter out into oxygen, and I take a bunch of images just in oxygen, and then I do the same thing with sulfur. So and I have, you know, 50 images of hydrogen, 50 images of oxygen, 50 minutes of sulfur, or images of sulfur, and they're all 10 minutes each image. So you're looking at like 20 hours of time right now of shooting this target. What PixInsight can do that helps is it will take all these images and it will stack them all on top of each other, give you one image that's all aligned with each other and that's ready for editing. Photoshop can do that, but it is a lot of steps and it's a lot of time. And I feel like for everything in life, as far as technology goes, it's not about sticking with what's traditional. It's about what improves the quality of life. I don't think I'm sentimental to anything. I just, if it improves the quality of life, that's what I support. And so that saved a lot of time. So what I'll do normally is I actually juggle both of them. I'll go PixInsight, stack everything, make a lot of the main big tweaks and changes, and then finally when it's looking good, then I'll export it into Photoshop and edit it that way.
Got it, got it. So again, so yeah, it's everybody different preferences because I guess, because I just want to hear your personal take on that because some people are talking about, no, I do prefer Photoshop. Some people are saying, yeah, it's PixInsight, it does work for me. And some people are saying if you're going to transition from, Photoshop to PixInsight, you might get confused because still, for the same task, there is a completely different name and you kind of have to learn everything from the scratch. So,
Oh yeah.
everybody gives those but again, there are technologies right now because we live in kind of this technological age, and there are a few, kind of people talk about Topaz Labs, as you probably heard. It's kind of
Yep.
this AI based, image sharpening, which
Yeah.
some people said that it could add, again, as you mentioned, some of the stuff. Because look, like AI is going to be in charge. What it want to point out, and that program might be adding some stuff that doesn't even exist in the photo. So they're kind of, scared about that. But I'm sure there will be something like that that will help to tackle the problems. And my question would be, again, you mentioned the Starlink, and I had a guy, and you can go, guys, and check it out, the podcast 49 episode where we had the conversation with Juan Puerta. So he basically is focused just on that, on satellites becoming junk, an actual junk. It's not what astrophotographers call junk, just an existing operating satellite. Like I'm talking about junk, like colliding and making a bunch of pieces. And, because we had three times this year, we got a kind of emergency situation with ISS. And, because those problems will happen if there'll be more and more satellites. And we're talking 520 satellites just from, SpaceX itself, so a
Yeah.
year. So what do you think, is it going to be a big problem, and like how can we tackle that as a nation and as everybody, because that's everybody's problem, because we have huge observatories that getting built here on the planet, and they do kind of important work at the same time. Of course, people talking about James Webb and other stuff as well. But what do you see happening in the future when it comes to the Starlink and the rest of the satellites out there in orbit?
So here's my take on it is I'll start with the astrophotography side of it, and then I'll go into just the life kind of side of it. Astrophotographers like to make a really big deal about it, that it's like, oh, it ruins all our photos, and then they'll share one of them. But in reality, and this is kind of the real truth of it, is when you have a bunch of images and you stack them together, they're gone. So I don't think it's a big issue for astrophotography. I do think it is a big issue for like scientific studies for and scientific astronomers that take kind of it's one image and whatnot, and they just that's what they study. That I know has affected them, which could lead to some other really big problems and things that aren't discovered that we could have discovered if we didn't have that kind of distraction. Um, but as far as space junk, and it's such a weird situation because one, something like Starlink, it improves the life of people down here on Earth. Like it's got a good reason to be up there. Um, People now around the world have access to things like internet and to be able to use the phone that weren't really able to do so before. And um and so I think I like the idea of it. um but like you said, it's getting to a dangerous point where our space station becomes a little bit more at risk for every Starlink we send up. And that's I would take the Starlink over. I mean, I would take ISS over Starlink any day. Uh, I think it will. I do think that it will get to a point where there is so much revolving around the Earth that getting something outside of the Earth isn't worth the risk anymore. And at that point, it's dangerous. Like it's dangerous to leave Earth, and we've kind of trapped ourselves. And
Because now we're talking about, again, everybody, and once we got introduced like to, let's say, cube satellites, where like universities have a capability of launching those. And again, when we're talking about a satellite, and I have one of the guests, Rifat Sharouk, and he's from India, and his team are, doing some incredible work. I mean, he, launched with NASA the world's smallest satellite, as far as he said. It was about like 3 by 3 like centimeters. I don't know in inches for you guys how big is that, but it's about that big, like
Yeah.
this size. And
Okay.
it's awesome. But I mean, that type of a satellite, it doesn't have any propulsion systems to make sure that you can actually redirect your trajectory from collision happening. So, and there will be more and more of those kind of, cube satellites, and different, satellites will be launched, because we're looking to save on costs, so called. So saving on costs, that means you have to kind of launch something smaller. And
Yeah.
smaller doesn't have the exactly the same propulsion capabilities again. So yeah, so this is happening already, and we had this conversation, and he said that Japan, Sweden, and United Kingdom is already having companies who are actually launching spacecrafts in orbits, and they kind of, using harpoons and nets, just like fishing, and kind of, gathering this junk in space right now.
I think that's
So
great.
that it is great, so it opens up opportunities for the other businesses, because we are good. I think we're good as people at handling those type of kind of situations, because we're creative enough, and
Yeah.
where we have a problem, we're always coming up with some sort of solution.
Was it India or something that shot a missile up and tried to explode, and it blew up one of its satellites or something, and then just created this huge thing of like explosion of space junk? It was like 2, 3 years ago.
I can't remember, but it happened one more than one time. One time
Yeah.
it was a satellite. It got, I think it was either Russian, because I spoke with a guy from Australia, and he does observation only, and he observes variable stars, and he did some groundbreaking research. I mean, and nobody knows that guy. And this episode is out, so make sure that you guys go and watch that. Rod Stubbings, so he's unbelievable. And one of those satellites actually fell on Australia at some point. It didn't hit any city, because Australia is quite big, and a lot of that is kind of remote places. It's like
Right.
nothing's happening around. But it did happen, because he said he saw that in the sky. Actually, I think it was Russian, some sort of a satellite. Because he was observing, because he did 300 plus observations, and he's like the number 3 in the world right now. And he saw. I was actually watching it kind of fall to the ground. So these
It's
things
so
will happen.
dangerous.
It is getting dangerous, to the point. But again, so talking about the rest of the space and what's happening with that, I mean, is there any kind of space projects or anything that's currently happening? I mean, do you pay attention, and would you point out any specific, let's say, space projects or anything else that maybe it's important for you personally, and you will feel like people should know about that?
Yeah. So I think the James Webb Telescope will definitely be a game changer, just like Hubble was once a game changer, and still is, relevant. But I think the James Webb will just blow everything that we've known about. I think we'll learn so much more about space from that telescope, assuming we ever get it out to space, because I think we've moved the date back like 10 times already. But so that I think is great. Um, I think that, so before I continue, I think I'm a big NASA fan. I love what they do. I love everything they stand for and what they're doing. So don't let this sound like I'm not, but I think SpaceX will get to Mars and put people on Mars first. Um, I think SpaceX is taking the more direct approach of like, all right, let's just find a way to get to Mars and come back, while NASA is more, let's go to the moon, build a base on the moon, and then launch from the moon to Mars, because there's no gravity, and therefore you can fuel up on the moon
Mhm.
and still have so much more fuel to get, it's easier to launch off the moon than it is to launch off Earth. I mean, we have huge rockets on the back of what we do, and those are completely depleted before we even get into space. So when you launch off the moon, it's kind of just like you just need like a little kick and you're on your way.
Exactly.
Um, So I think they both have a decent way of getting to Mars. I do think that um, I'm a big Elon Musk fanboy. Not gonna lie, um, and even though I don't agree with everything that he's done, but I do love the fact that he's innovative. He's thinking outside the box. He's kind of like, okay, well, I know it's not invented yet, but let's make it happen. Like, just I know people don't really look at it this way, but just the fact that we can re-land rockets is such a huge improvement to the space industry.
Mhm.
You don't have, I mean, for those that don't know, the actual rocket itself is one of the most expensive parts of taking something into space. And so if you can save all that money, I know Elon Musk says this all the time, but imagine there's a huge pile of cash falling from the sky. Like, would you want to catch it, or do you just want to let it go to the bottom of the ocean? So it helps. The reusable rockets have definitely helped progress getting humans to space exploration, and the whole Starship thing. I think is going to take a lot longer than Elon Musk says, because those, getting someone to Mars not is not a fast thing like he thinks. But um, I think that's kind of the best way of putting people on Mars.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's great, to have those visionary type of people. And, I'm really grateful that a lot of people backing him up and, becoming fan of his. And of course, like, as you say, we don't have to agree with everything that he says. But look, like somebody else is trying to do these things. And, so that's entirely probably a different discussion because, I spoke with these people as well who work on Mars colonization projects. And, like we always kind of come down to this conclusion that it's not the technology, it's not another kind of nuclear propulsion system that will help us to take to the kind of light speed and stuff. It's not even that. Like we're talking about us as people, like coming together and colonizing other planets. And as Elon says, doing that without any rules and regulations, which again, in this day and age, when we have plenty of those, I don't think it will be like physically possible for somebody to go to Mars and nobody will be like regulated before they're going to land, if they're going to be accountable of what they're going to do in Mars. I mean,
Yeah.
so like we're talking about how long for us is going to take that, to kind of come on the same page and understand like, look, we either going to do this or it's like we're going to get extinct,
Yeah.
because that will happen. If it's either going to be 2036, top people talking about the Apophis, closest approach ever, or it's going to be some sort of meteorite, or it's going to be the sun after a billion years, or it's going to be something else, or it's going to
Yeah.
be some sort of a biological thing. Like, but it's definitely because it's a ticking bomb. It's just a question of time and when it's going to happen.
Yeah, the
So
world, the world and humanity as we know it is going to die.
yeah,
That's, I know it sounds gruesome, but that's how it's always been since the dawn of time.
yeah.
Is, we had the dinosaurs, something wiped out the dinosaurs. We had stuff before the dinosaurs, and that got wiped out too. And it's just evolution. Do I think it's going to happen anytime in our lifetime or the lifetimes of the next 30 generations from now? No, but at the
So
same time, we don't know.
So my question for you, Mac, I mean, should we pay attention to our phones and again making and internet accessible all over the world? Or should we plan out for maybe for something bigger? Because again, there's a lot of, like as somebody pointed out to me, because I never thought about that before as well. I mean, Elon launching Tesla, a car in space, that's a good ad for him as a company, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a business, like look, Blue Origin and SpaceX, and unless it's government owned agency just like NASA or ESA or JAXA or ISRO, they're not doing that to make sales. Of course, they want to get more people, attention, because it's just like Space Shuttle that got defunded because it didn't, capture a lot of people attention from a public standpoint. But a lot of it is business. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like, should we do this? And I mean, what would you say to the people again who are watching this today and thinking about, if it's astrophotography, if it's doing this or that. But what would you say for the people to just to get involved again with something that will kind of move the needle, a little bit further, so we can do something, faster? Because I think it's the more we get involved with it, the more people. Because I'm sure there's a lot of genius like of people who are stuck in, in big banks, and they do kind of stock trading or something crazy, but and they make a lot of money, but they probably would do a lot better for people and just for the planet if they're going to do something just like this, just like the things that you're working on. So what would you say for the people to inspire them and encourage them more?
And again, this is just my personal opinion. There's no right answer to this, but I have a kind of thing with my own life is I would like to die leaving the world in a better place than I came in. And I want to change, and that could even be something as small as helping somebody out on Instagram Messenger, be like answering a question that sets their life off into a better way. You've changed the world in somewhere better. I mean, we also do bad things if you're here and there. It's we mess up. That's part of life. But to answer your question along that line is find something that you're interested in. It could be anything. If you like the ideas of rockets, then you can be a rocket engineer. If you like the whole system stuff, I know a lot of people that are systems engineers. For me, I'm not a very electronical or technical person. I don't deal with math very well. And I was drawn to the astrophotography side of things, which still I think just that alone really helps space and getting the word out there and getting people interested.
Yep.
I think if you're an engineer, you're definitely going to um if you see some engineering stuff in space, you'll like, oh, I'm gonna go that way. But I think as far as astrophotography is, like, it's beautiful images, and even people who aren't interested in space, I think, can really appreciate what a good image is, and then get them excited. And then you start to figure out, how did they do this? Like, you take a picture of a nebula or a galaxy, and people wonder, wow, you can actually do that? Like, that's unreal. And so I think astrophotographers do a lot for the space community of getting awareness out about space, getting people interested in space. Yeah, we're not the ones putting people into space. We're not the ones responsible for, we're not going to be the ones that put someone on Mars. But I think just getting the interest of space is so important. It's, back when we first put someone on the moon, I felt like the whole world was together at one moment,
Yep.
and we all were on the same page of like, wow, this is really happening. We put someone on the moon. I think about that too. Every time like the full moon is out and I look up at the thing, I'm like, man, at one point, well, at many points, there was somebody on that looking back at us. And that is such a huge achievement. And then now, like, we don't really see Mars. We see like a star. It's so small and it's super bright, but we don't actually see any details on it unless you have a telescope. But like from just looking at it, and one day, hopefully within the next decade, we put someone on there and they looked down upon us, and he didn't even look like pictures of people from the moon taking pictures of Earth. We will literally just look like a dot, a star. And so I think, to answer your question in a few sentences, it's literally find something you're interested in. No matter what the kind of field is, and even it could be something, like fashion. Yeah, you're into fashion, but you love space. Well, guess what? We need people to like kind of deal with spacesuits and technology upgrades when it comes to blankets and things that have to do with the fabrics that go inside. Like, you can literally, I feel like you can find anything within your profession and relate it to space and the stuff that goes on in space.
Exactly. So I would say for that people, because I think some of the people, again, they have a passion for space. And instead of choosing and saying, oh, maybe I should go and pursue, again, help somebody to create, have this kind of big vision for themselves and for the, people going to think, oh, I need to maybe create some designer t-shirts and sell them. Because
Hmm.
that's what people are going to, think about. Nobody,
Yeah.
there will be just a few people who will think about, I need to add value to the space industry. They will be like, no, 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 I need to make money. It's a great time. A lot of people are interested. I'm just going to try to catch the wave and make a bunch of money. What
Yeah.
you're gonna
There's
do? Like,
there's
we're about to extinct. Like at some point, like why do we chasing all this? Like I do understand we live in this society. It's very important. Like on this planet, we do need cash to survive, to live under the roof, to feed ourselves, to dress ourselves. Because look, we want the shoes, we want the designer shoes, we want the fancy watch, the new phone. Everything has to be. I understand the trend, I understand the wave, but I don't want to carry the same stuff to other planets. You know, which it's slightly
yeah.
concerning if we have this kind of bigger picture for what's going to happen in the future. It could be because again when you're talking about you know like I wouldn't even look from the perspective that you said that as astrophotographers you're adding value, just again bringing more awareness. Like it's not even that. Like let's look from an angle of putting somebody, let's say, colonizing Mars. And would you rather put a person on the planet who never even seen the sky? Like because that's who we are right now. We like when we stuck in the cities where like there's so many people never seen a Milky Way before.
Yeah.
So would you put
I
that
did. I
person?
actually did a poll.
Would you put that
Sorry.
person on a
Continue.
Mars, or would you put a person who actually did astrophotography? He knows all the like nebulas, where the galaxy, where the stars are. He can actually put a location. He can actually understand what's happening out there and have some knowledge. I would rather put those people, as a colonization, on other planets.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I do think that we do have to focus on things here on Earth, and I think that even things like the example I did, fashion. It's like it's important to do here on Earth,
Yep.
and people find a lot of joy in that. I feel like, especially with these days when it comes to like the mental health issue of the world and things, people need a creative outlet to be able to do things. And so even if it is just making money on selling t-shirts with a rocket on it or something like that, or whatever it is, I don't care. But like, um I think it definitely helps people and have a creative outlet to do the things that they want to do. I don't think it necessarily should always be about space. But that being said, I think that anybody who has a love for space and that would always want to be in the space industry, but has a talent in something else that has nothing to do with space, I
Mhm.
think that there's definitely a place in space, or the race to get to space for them. I think that they can find something. I mean, I've got my little brother. He is a video game nerd, super video game. Like that's literally what he does all day. Is he plays video games and he streams and does all these kind of things. But he took that knowledge of video games and kind of the physics behind video games. He knows just a little bit, small bit of like Python coding,
Mhm.
um, and C++, and he worked at NASA, literally
Wow.
making sure that planets were in their on their proper orbit. And if a planet moved from their orbit a little bit, he had to like figure out its new trajectory of where it was going to go. And all these things are super important. And he got that literally just because he was into video games, but he also loved space. So um, I do think that there is a space in the space industry for anybody with any profession.
Yep.
You just got to figure a way to like do how to use it. And even if you don't know how to use your own thing, NASA will help you too. My little brother literally just applied to NASA, say, "Hey, here's what I do. Here's what I'm good at. Put me somewhere where you think I would be best." And they're normally really good with figuring it out and giving you some choices of some places to be.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, they're good at problem solving for sure. So Yeah, so NASA has some big problems they have to solve themselves. So that is awesome. First of all, congrats of again, both of you are, into like the space industry and you love these things. So that is awesome. That is really cool. So again, I have a few last questions that I would love to ask you again,
Of
because
course.
I'm sure you get asked that question once in a while because you're just gonna. Because if you're in astrophotography, you'll look at the sky, people will come up and approach you, and there will be a question. Do you think there's something out there? So, what's your personal take on that?
Ooh, ooh, now we're getting theoretical. I would say um, it is very it is very important, and I feel like this has been lost. I'm not going to get political at all, but I will say that this has definitely been lost in the world these days. Is it is very important to understand the difference between fact and what we know in the moment, or theory. And I think it's always good to try and challenge fact, but also know that it's fact until it is proven different. That's kind of the scientific method of things. So I think I think that there is aliens out there. I think that there's a quote from one of my favorite movies, Contact, that they ask her, "Hey, do you believe in aliens?" And she says, "If there isn't, then it's an awfully great waste of space."
Yeah,
Um, I think that it's such a huge universe, and there are so many things in the Goldilocks zone, which, for those that don't know, is that perfect space away from the sun where it's not too cold and not too hot, where life can, well, as life as we know, can survive, and grow and evolve. Obviously, we live in the Goldilocks zone, so there's many other planets and universes out there that do the same thing. Um, so I think it is somewhat naive to think that they don't exist, but at the same time, we do have to understand this point in there is proof of them. There's no proof of the existence and science, and I'm talking scientifically. I mean, I'm sure that there's people Area 51, um, but at this point they don't exist, and therefore I'm not going to say that they exist, but I believe that the chances of them existing out there is pretty high.
yeah, yeah, exactly. If we just look at that from kind of mathematical perspective, again, just at the chances of in this vast of universe, which it should be something there just by looking at the numbers, because we as people, because again, I brought this point a few times before, and I kind of wanted to give you, and maybe you can give me some feedback on that. Actually, a few things, but it's going to be very very quick. So first thing, I like love Carl Sagan, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who came across him. I mean, he's he put a lot of people again on this map of, yeah, exactly, of you have to look up and understand the universe and the beauty of it and all these great things. But again, at the same time, what happened with the Voyager and with this golden disc that we sent it over? Because I remember this exact words of it wasn't his words, but it was some scientist that said, if it's for those extraterrestrial, human being likes to discover and kind of understand where we are in the universe and this exact locations of our kind of, in space and DNA and what the people are like, and you know the entire story. So
Yeah.
and the scientist said, because those, human being like, extraterrestrials, they will understand because math is universal language. And it was like, hold on right there, because how do you know?
Yeah, that one has always confused me.
Yeah.
Is how do we know that math is a universal? I mean, technically, we created math. It's a it's a formula that we created to be able to distinguish one thing from another.
Yeah.
Like, how do you say that this is longer than this? How do you say that this is farther than this? So we created math. Well, at least the concept of distinguish. I don't know.
Mm. What do you think about approach? Because I heard this actually in a few other podcasts that people probably can go and find, and a lot of the scientists are doing similar research. And again, I'm talking about scientists talking about the subject what I'm about to speak, And again, you being in California, like the laws with when it comes to some, with the like weed and stuff like that, it's legal. It's been legal probably for ages. And there's
Mhm.
other kind of, people are talking about DMT and other drugs. So again, it's not the show, so I'm not gonna get into details. So pros and cons and all of that stuff. But some of the people who are actually talking, doing all this kind of, let's say, trips, they're talking about meeting some sort of a, dimensional people, and those people kind of giving them some sort of advice. They kind of understand on this logical level, but when they come back from that trip, it's very hard for them to explain. So, and some people are talking about giving conclusions that, again, what's happening in the universe, it could be on this kind of psychological level, and that we cannot perceive what is actually happening in the universe, because we just have the sensory acuity, again, through our retina, and through the vision, through the touch, through the noise, and we just feel and look at the universe from that perspective. So, and it
Yeah.
could be the way that we actually look at the universe and the way we communicate right now, that the way I see everything right now currently, it could be, again, the way my eye just perceives. It could not be exactly the reality that we live in. So again, there is a lot of different things, that again, it's just from a few podcasts that I've, as far as I heard, I thought these guys brought up. So again, if we go deep in the wormhole, that's kind of the conversation that you go deep in, and you just
Love the
try to
wormhole.
guess. We just try to guess, and kind of, I guess it's some of the topics that we should discuss, as people, like how
Yeah.
part, but we get to the point again where people like, click, I want to go to another video, because it's too much to handle sometimes, and I do understand. We have our bills to
Yeah.
pay, we have, again, we live in a COVID, the entire situation, but it's something
I think
interesting.
not really said this on a podcast before, but I experimented with some fun here and there, and I will say that there are times where you will, and I don't advocate this for anybody. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't. But there were times, I had, something, whatever, and uh, got a little more in depth about my life, or saw something that I hadn't seen before, or realized, or about the world, and that changed my life in the better. I haven't done any of that stuff in 15 years, but I will say that as far as these people that are saying these things, I think, kind of like what I said before, that we have to understand the difference between theory and fact. And I do think that there is a possibility, a total possibility. I'm not writing it off at all, that these people that have done these kind of drugs or whatnot have had some sort of a revelation of some sort, or had something happen to them that will change their mentality on something in a way that most people aren't thinking about, which is exactly sometimes what we need to be able to get to the next level.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have to break away from the norm of how everybody is thinking in order to open up the box, get outside the box, and expand the box. And but that being said, is I do think it's important that when someone does have these kind of revelations, that they write them down, or that they, you have a good understanding of it, and then you can either, like I said, go through the scientific method yourself to try and prove these kinds of things. Or if you don't think that you can prove them, because I'm not a scientific person, I've got these wild ideas all the time. um, I I don't know how I would be able to prove it. You can pitch them to people that do. You say, "Hey, NASA, like, um, I have this really crazy idea. I want to pitch it to you, see what you think." And either they will give you their NASA, like, you know, approach of, whatever. But you never know. There could be a moment where someone will listen to you, uh, and agree with the idea of what you're saying, and realize that this could be some sort of breakthrough, and test it and figure it out. And honestly, it could be like an Einstein thing, where Einstein's theory of relativity wasn't proved until 100 years later. When we discovered gravitational waves, what was that, 2016 or something like that, 15, something of the sort. He did this. It was crazy at the time, but we understood the idea of it, but we had no way to really prove it. So at that point, it was theory, and then 100 years later, we found a way to figure it out. So what you think now, what you've had in your trip or whatnot, it could lead to something that's revolutionary later on down the line. But you got to write it down. You got to pitch it. You got to tell people about it, but also understand that it is just theory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I heard these things again because people know again one of the big podcasters that you guys had. Sorry to say that had, but he moved out now to Texas to Joe Rogan. So he's a big advocate when it comes to talking these stuff, DMT experiences and things like that. And he has a bunch of guests. So he's just one of the people to
Yeah.
kind of look up to, too, because he has a great podcast. So there's a few things that you can learn from there as well on conducting these type of interviews and just it broadens your personal view, because you think, okay, maybe that could be possible or not. But again, there is, these things could be, again, that could be it because, again, we don't know so much. Because, like you talked about the movie again, The Contact. Because I remember watching one movie as well. I can't remember exactly the name of it, but it's just one line kind of blew me away at the same time too. Because this lady, she just went into this kind of water, and they were on a spaceship. She walked out, she was like younger, and she asked that person who was taken from this planet, this is kind of dumb movie, but the line just struck me, and she was like, do you know what's the most like expensive thing in the universe? And she just looked, she was like, I don't know. She said time. She said time is the biggest commodity. And it was like,
Yep.
whoa, like that's what it is. I mean, to this life, I mean,
Oh
that's
yeah.
the time is the it. You know, we're
Yeah.
talking about
I
oil, gold, other like stuff, and like mining asteroids, dollars and euro signs, like time. That's what it is. At the end of the day,
oh
we
yeah.
just have so much of it, and what we're gonna do with it. That's the question.
I always tell people that when you're gonna buy something, you're not buying something with money. I mean, technically, the physical aspect of it is money, but money is time. And you have when you are, if you're making something like $20 an hour or $15 an hour, how many hours of your life are you going to have to spend to earn up the amount of money for a camera or something like that? And then at that point you have to understand that when you buy the camera, you are buying it with the time that you spent to if this is a $2,000 camera, then that's over a month and a half of working um, at at $15 an hour just to be able to afford this. Are you willing to give away a month and a half of your time of 8 hours a day, every single day, just to have this piece of, property that you can just have in your hand? Is this worth a month and a half of your time? And I think that's something super important to think about, because it's easy just to swipe a card and
Yeah.
and just buy something. But do you really realize that you're giving away your time, your life, and you don't have very much of your life? So think about it. If you have 80 years on your life, are you going to, but you have are you going to spend that 80 years on just material objects? Are you going to, it's different for everybody. It's what is worth that time for you. What are you going to spend that time on? Imagine if I came to you and said, hey, I'm going to take a month and a half off your life, but I will give you this camera. It's somewhat, I mean, it's not the same, but it's kind of along the same, like, this is what I think in my head is it worth taking a month and a half off my life so that I can own a camera? And some things are worth it, some things are not, and it's different for everybody. Some people think everything is worth it, and that's fine. I don't think I'm not here to judge anybody. Everybody, the time is subjective, or the value of time is subjective. So it's just it's crazy to think about. And I think you're 100% right that what is the most expensive thing in the universe? It's time.
Yeah, exactly. Because look, time puts everything in different perspective. Because again, I'm not gonna be talking about, because people again, because we live in like crazy times. I'm talking about like social media makes the times better at the same time because I can have a conversations with amazing people just like yourself, and now you're in different part of the world, and I can have these conversations, which is awesome. Like I love that part, but I don't like the part where the real message that some people put out, let's say years ago, it got distorted through social media and became this kind of, you got one thing that started and there's a completely different answer right now. And there's a bunch of different people that distorted the message, and now people getting different perspective, and the things that used to be before are now a little bit different. And
Yeah.
where's that going to take? I mean, in the future, along the lines, because it doesn't look very promising when we input the social media as kind of the main driver for the information, for the kind of source. It doesn't look like very promising, but there is a lot of positives from that as well. But that's time.
It's the
I'm
classic game of telephone.
exactly,
Do you have that over there where you guys are at, the
of
game of
course,
telephone? Yeah,
of
okay.
course,
So yeah, it's the more mouths and ears that it goes through, it's going to get distorted. It's going to be picked up a little bit different, and it's going to be portrayed a little bit differently.
yeah,
And I think that's, again, not getting political, but I think that it's a big problem that we as society has these days, where things are so distorted that you don't really know what the fact is anymore.
exactly.
Like, it could be false news, it could be true but skewed news,
Mhm.
and biased news. And so how many times have you and I seen NASA scientists just said this, and you believe it and you post it. And that's the worst part. I hate when people do that, where they just repost, that's it. It's like, we found life on Mars, whatever. And it's like you just repost, and now all of a sudden you get 1,000 people that see it. 900 people might not believe it, but 100 people are going to believe it, and then they're going to repost it, and then it just starts going out to everyone. And people, this makes the world dumber.
Exactly. Because look,
um,
at the end of the day, Mac, we're just coming back to the same kind of, we're circling back and we're coming back to the same point, which is exactly what I said. Do we need Starlink putting up all these satellites and giving us internet connection, which is like, I do understand we need the selfies with beers outside somewhere in Utah and Colorado and all these great things. Like, we need that. We got used to that life. I do understand. I mean, it's funny, but it's important at the same time. It makes communication between people easier, and, it's all fine, but at the same time, it's like, is it that important?
no.
Is having those pieces, is that important? Because we can create so much more with that time. And again, like on the planet, like we created this kind of the money, the currency that we have, and the currency itself, it doesn't have value until we do something. Until I go and use my hands, my head, my arm, until I do something, then I create the money. So
Yeah.
basically, money is worthless at the end of the day. We're talking about the people who can make something, happen in the world and in the society. So exactly, I love what you point that you just said. If we stop thinking about consumerism and starting think as producers, as people who can actually add the value, and as you said, if you're a lawyer, if you're a designer, if you do anything and you don't think that you can add value to the space and exploration of it, you're wrong, because you can't.
Yeah, and so like I mentioned earlier, my first kind of thing is to leave the world in a better place than you found it. Um, but and I think this is probably, it's one of the biggest ones, is to live happy. I
Yeah,
mean, we're, like I said, we're on this earth for so long, um, and it's never long enough. And when you think about it in the span of how long humans have been around, it's very short. And I think that people kind of, they're so distracted with everything in life, money, stress, a job. These days, it's politics and the world stuff. Are they making you happy? Are they making, I'm not talking about, you, but like, everybody out there, is it making people happy? Does it cause more stress or less stress? And I think I think it's very important to have a list. I've got a big list that I have of everything that makes my life stressful and everything that I don't like, and then everything I do like and everything that I think is positive. I I don't deal with politics at all. I don't deal with any sort of hatred or news or any of that stuff. I don't. It's not that it's not important. It's just it doesn't make me happy. And I get if people want to do that. I 100% respect it. I'm totally fine with it. But I want to deal with space. Space makes me happy. It makes me feel like, there's so much out there that I don't know, that I want to know about, and I want to learn, and I want to figure out how it goes, the physics of it, the astrophysics, the I love picking apart my own images of, like, a galaxy, and figure out what's in front of us, what's in back of us, what makes up this galaxy and all these things. And I know that, like, in the grand scheme of what's happening on Earth, all these things are not important, but it makes me happy. And people, I feel like this a lot these days, is because people are so consumed with everything that's going on in the world, on every country, that they're spending their lives unhappy. They're spending their lives stressed. They're spending their lives in a negative position. And before you know it, 10 years are going to go by. And I mean, just think of this year with Corona. I had I don't want to, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I'm coming up with a point to this, is I had an amazing year this year. And I had an amazing year because I took the time in quarantine to, like, focus on myself and the things that I love to do and the things that make me happy. And I didn't deal with any of the world stuff and the craziness. Um, and because of that, I was productive, I was happy. And I feel like a lot of people this year, from what I've seen online, they feel like they've wasted a whole year. Like this year was just about surviving.
Yeah.
And I think next year will be the same thing for people. It will be just about surviving, unless they take the time to really, like, focus on the things they enjoy and do the things that they enjoy. I mean, obviously we've got restrictions now that we're in quarantine. I don't know if you guys are still in lockdown, but California is pretty much in lockdown. We can leave our homes, and people do, but um it's definitely not recommended at all. But it's just figure out what's in your life. Make a list. Lists are great. It helps actually take it out of your mind, because it's hard to think about it, so many things at the same time. Puts it on a piece of paper. Try and take all the things that are stressful and negative energy in your life and start to expel them one by one. I don't need this in my life. I don't need this in my life. This is not, as important. And then take all the things that are positive that you love and bring those in as well. And a lot of my stuff revolves around space and the knowledge of it and figuring it out. And, you know, it's not the same for everyone. I'm not saying that for, everybody get into space, but everyone's different.
I
And
would
I
say
think,
I will say that get in space, get into space.
yeah,
Everybody's who's watching, because I'm not afraid to tell you guys, you will need to get into space. Because look, the more people would take part again of what's happening right now, and again, some of the people I think that are unhappy, because I've been unhappy most of the times when I'm focusing on or I'm doing something that is kind of small thing. I mean, it's still important because we need to do a lot of small stuff, and that's what the life is made of. A lot of these kind of small pieces, but if
mhm,
we just try to have a bigger picture always in our heads, because when I was a kid, I told that story a couple of times. When I used to, I thought I have a problem, so-called problem. My bicycle is broken, or there's something, like whatever. When you just look up at the sky, because I had the privilege of like to go to my grandma's village, and before, like at nighttime, they used to shut off the lights, and there was like zero light pollution almost, because again they used to shut off the lights, not because, oh, look at the sky, because village is trying to save money on electricity, that's pretty much it. But
yeah,
it gave us kind of exposure to, and we used to see like satellites going by and everything like crystal clear. And when I used to have these kind of problems, I used to think about these moments like there's something happening out there, and that gave me goosebumps. And I was like, the problem that I'm complaining, like this thing right there, it's like nothing comparing to what's actually happening in this vast of universe and in this life. And
Yeah.
life's supposed to give you goosebumps, so maybe you start having this kind of bigger picture of what's out there. It's even like through getting involved with the astrophotography or any space related projects. Like there's people out there, just like you, just like Mac, who can give you the tips, the tricks, the insights of what do you need to get started. So my personal recommendation, get in contact with this man. Again, ask him questions about equipment, because I'm sure he will give you a bunch of great tips. If I mean, he did already on this podcast, but there's, as I said, many more different pieces and information is when it gets to getting involved with this hobby. So again, awesome. So again, appreciate you coming on today, Mac. It's been a great pleasure talking with you, get to know you and your personal story. I mean, it's probably been the longest episode that I did so far, but I enjoyed every minute of it. Because I mean, you seem like really passionate about what you do, and I love the fact that you're inspiring other people and you want them to do exactly the same and more. So this is awesome. Like keep doing
Thank,
this amazing work, and like love it.
thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, thank you. So, guys, before we're gonna go, one thing that I want to ask you, as always, if you share this episode with your friend, so again, could be any friend, just make sure to pass it along. I mean, there's a lot of great pieces, a lot of motivation, inspiration on first of all why you should get involved with these projects, and a lot of great information pieces for starting in astrophotography. So make sure to pass this along. And as always, guys, I'll see you next time. And don't forget, keep exploring.